What's happening, YouTube? It's Simon466 Cards, and today we're going to talk about Luka's cards in a free fall. But how far are they going to fall? We're going to take a deep dive into that, looking at some data as we sometimes do here on the channel. So on the screen right now, you see Luka's Silver Prism with a 35% decrease over the past 3 months from just shy of 3K all the way down to 1250 as of April the 27th. And so 35%, that's a big number. That seems like a lot because it is. But the question that I had in my mind is, well, how far is this thing going to fall? There's a couple of famous things in stocks. One of them is don't try to catch a falling knife, but also even dead cats bounce if you drop them from high enough, right? So both of those obviously coming at it from two different angles. And so I decided to look into the data to see what we could find based off of the Silver Prism pricing. And so that's the crux of this video. And we start off by thinking about not just Luka in isolation, but about the other three, what I'm calling pillars of the pandemic for basketball. And there were four of them, right? There was Trae Young, there was Zion, there was Ja Morant, and there was Luka. Trae and Luka in the 2018 class, Zion and Ja Morant were in the 2019 class, and so they were the young hot guys right as the hobby blew up, and we had that big spike in 2020. And so if you look at these charts, they all look very much, generally similar shapes, right? A big spike up right around 2020, early 2021, and then a slow decline back to more normal, sane prices. But lost in all this data is the like really nuance of kind of how it peaked and how things have leveled out since then. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare the peak pricing for each of these four players, because I think there are a lot of similarities in terms of what drove that hype, and compare that, not just the very, very peak, but kind of what I'm calling the peak area, which is not just what is the high point, but what is like the high range that they hit right around that spike, and then compare them to their current pricing, again, as of today, August 27th. So here is the Silver Prism, and I'm sticking with Silver Prism, and we'll talk about how we expand this analysis to other cards if someone is holding a non-Silver Prism Luka card. The peak is 3,800 for Trae, 6,500 for Zion, 6K for Morant, and 10K for Luka. But that's just the one sale, and so I want to expand a little bit beyond that and look at the peak range. So for Trae, 29 to 3,500, 5 to 6K for Zion, 45 for Morant, and 8 to 9K for Luka. You compare them to their current prices, and it's obviously a massive drop, 90-ish% for all of them, basically 80-90%. And that's when I create these two additional columns here. They're what I'm calling the peak multiplier and the peak range multiplier. Very simple math. I'm taking the peak price and dividing by the current price for the peak multiplier. For the peak range multiplier, I'm taking that range and then dividing by the current price just to see how much it's fallen. So the bigger the number, the more it's fallen, right? And so you can see for Trae, for the peak multiplier, you divide 3.8K by $228. It's a 16.5 multiplier. If you do the peak range, it's about 13 to 15. That's a big number. That's a 90+% drop. If you look at Zion, it's 12 for the peak and then right around 9 or 10 for the range. You go to Ja Morant, he's at about 10 for the peak and 6.3, 7.9 for the range. You look at Luka, he's at 8, so way less than Trae and even Zion and Morant. And you look at the range, and it's around 6 and 7, right around what Morant's doing. Now think about Trae's season in 2022. By no means was it a good season because of all the turmoil within his team, but he definitely had a better season than Zion, right? And so there's no reason why over the last 3 years Trae's pricing has gone down more than Zion. Not just 2022, but in general, right? And you look at some of these other players and you're just like, well, Trae is sticking out a lot based on the amount that he fell, even though, like, Morant and Luka have obviously had a better 2 to 3 year window since the spike. But there's no way, like, I would definitely say that Trae's last 2 to 3 years have been way better than Zion because he's actually been on the court. So if you look at it from that perspective, there's no reason why Trae's number should be at least, higher than Zion. What's more interesting though is I think all of these numbers, they're all going to migrate to the Trae number over time. I think the Zion will eventually go from 12 to 17. This range will go to roughly this range. Obviously not exactly, but get a lot closer to. Morant's will go from here to there and follow Trae's. And I think that'll happen with Luka because if there's no reason that Zion shouldn't be at the Trae numbers, then there's no reason the other two shouldn't be either. Because let's be honest, like Luka, besides being a great individual player, hasn't accomplished much for his team. And you could say the same for Trae. Trae's reached an Eastern Conference final. Luka's reached a Western Conference final. Luka's obviously made a couple of All-NBA teams and all that kind of stuff. But, like, Morant, you could say the same thing. To me, these are all just the victims of hype, these particular Silver Prism cards. And so there's really no rhyme or reason why these three wouldn't be lining up next to Trae's number. So let's see what happens when we take Luka's pricing and these numbers here and cross-reference them with the multipliers here and apply those multipliers to the Morant multiplier, the Zion multiplier, and then finally the Trae multiplier. So let's do that. And let's see what the price should be based off of these different multipliers. So Morant's multipliers are closest to Luka's multiplier, so then you would think that their number isn't that much different from Luka's price. So Luka's price is $1,250. The Morant multiplier is just over $1,000, and we're already at the range that the Morant multiplier suggests because you're comparing 6.4 to 7.2 to 6.3 to 7.9. So that's why this makes sense. That's why these align pretty well with the $1,250. The $1,052, $1,250. You get the idea. It's pretty close. The Zion multiplier is more interesting. It's $860. It's $750 to $1,000. That's well off $1,250. And if you look at the Trae multiplier, you're looking at $600, maybe even $5 something. And so that's just to give you an idea of how much the Morant, Zion, and Trae cards have fallen, and the fact that Luka hasn't fallen as much over the last 3 years from the peak, even though Luka had a much higher peak. And I don't think there's a reason for that should be the case, just to be straight up about it. Luka's had a better career, but that also was baked into the fact that his cards are worth more already. But compared to the peak and the peak range, I don't know that Trae has a reason to have fallen double the amount that Luka's have. And so that suggests to me that I wouldn't touch any of these Luka cards, even at this price, even though that it's fallen by 35% in the last 3 months. I'd stay away. And I'm not looking at any Luka stuff. And I just to be clear, I own 0 Luka stuff because I saw this coming. I made a video about this and about Zion cards and Ultra Modern in general about, I think, November 2022, and basically just none of these prices make sense. Stay away. Sell them if you can. These are all destined to go down. And I'll link that video in the description below for you to take a look at. And so I'm not touching any Luka cards anytime soon, even though it's down so much, because I think there's way more room to go. And if you own a non-Luka Silver Prism, you're probably wondering, well, how do I apply this logic? When do I know what to do with it? Well, first of all, if you own a Luka card, I'd just sell it right now, just straight up. But if you're looking to buy some Luka cards, when would you actually start looking around, poking around, seeing what the deal is? I would say if Luka's prices for the Silver Prism reaches around the $600 level, and I do believe it's going there. I think it's for sure going to be under a K in a year's time, but I would say that unless Luka's stuff Silver Prism hits around $600, that's the time when you might want to just start kicking the tires and seeing what's out there, because I don't think there are any buyer for most of these Luka cards at prices above where they're at right now. A lot of the investors flippers have left, or they have some of them have left at the very least, and I don't think there are more buyers that will cause the cards to go up in price, and that leads me to the next topic. Some of you might be saying, well, what if Luka has a great performance next season? His team does well. Let's they're all going to the moon then, right? Because they've fallen so much. There's so much room for it to go back up. And that's what I'd say. Have you taken a look at what the Dallas Mavericks have done as an organization over the past few years? It's been a mess. It's been a hot mess. Look at this roster. Outside of Luka, the only other above average player is Kyrie Irving, and we all know what that means and what that brings as a result of that disastrous trade that they made, right? Total disaster. I mean, and you look at this team, what good young players do they have? Nobody. Like, Josh Green is a nice role player, but that's about it. Everybody else pretends 30. Bullock 30 or 32. You look at all these players. Oh yeah, I guess Jaden Hardy, who knows? He's 20 and like very raw. But all these other guys, they're all in their 30s or late 20s. Like, there's no hope here, and that's why the Dallas Mavericks tanked, basically, like gave up on the last few games of the season to keep their draft pick that they had already traded away, and why they got fined by the NBA. But it doesn't just talk about roster management, and I'm not even touching the Kyrie trade, which is an absolute disaster. Let's go back even a year. They had a good sidekick for Luka, Jalen Brunson. He has said he would have signed for $55 million, but the Mavs were like, no, I don't think you're that good. And instead, he signed a $100 million contract with the Knicks, and they seem to be doing just fine with Jalen Brunson driving the team. That could have been a guy that the Mavs drafted that they could have kept as a great sidekick for Luka. They didn't keep him because they're just not a good, well-run team. Just another signing. JaVale McGee is 35. Why are you giving him a 3-year contract for $20 million? He is not good. And the funny part of this signing to me was when they signed him, they were like, oh yeah, he's going to be the starter at center for Luka because he's going to be a lob threat. Last year, he started 7 games. They gave up on this less than a month into the season. That's how bad that signing was. And it's, I think, representative of the Mavs as a whole and their front office. And it's not just the front office. It's the entire management of the team. What do I mean by that? I don't know if you remember this. That was a thing that happened. Not to be confused with the Donnie Nelson situation. Not to be confused with what they claim to be the reason why Donnie Nelson is trying to, quote unquote, extort them. And so you look at all of this as just, if there was one of these, you'd be like, oh, that's a one-off. You look at this in totality, and it just screams to me that the organization is not well run. And if you had asked me 10 years ago, is Mark Cuban a good NBA owner? I would have said yes. I think that ship has sailed, and he's not a good owner. He's not managing the team well for whatever reason. And so as a result, I don't see much hope for Luka in the next year or two. And so there are no positive catalysts. He might have a great individual statistical season next year, but unless they they win the lottery somehow and they're 8% chance or whatever it is to move up, I just don't see anything that's going to help them. A, because they don't have many assets. B, they don't have any good players. C, they just seem to be mismanaged both in the front office and as an organization as a whole, and that just comes from the top down. So with that being said, I think the summary is, if you own Luka cards, you shouldn't be like, it's gone down so much, I should hold on. I would sell them and just bite the bullet. And if you're looking to buy Luka cards, I'd say, hold off. I think there's more room to go. You might be able to get a better deal. in a year or so. So that's the video. I would be interested to hear if this rationale makes sense, if this resonates with you, if the logic makes sense, the data makes sense. And yeah, just in general, would love to hear your comments. One thing I do want to mention is Hobby News Daily. They are a new website that provides original writing, exclusive GemRate data, and a daily morning minute podcast, which is pretty good and provides just a little summary of what's happening in the hobby. And they have some of the best content creators in the hobby today. I'm very excited that they are featuring my stuff on their page. So remember hobbynewsdaily.com and Hobby News Daily on social, and check out their stuff. As we always do here on the channel, we preview the next video, and that is going to be about the eBay vault and why I think it might be one of the worst ideas that the hobby has ever come up with, or one of the worst ideas that some entity has come up with. I'd say it's right up there with some of the stuff that Beckett's done. It's and I'm going to explain that to you, and why you should never, honestly, just ever send your cards to the eBay vault. It's if you haven't read through some of the terms and conditions, you're in for a surprise. So with that being said, thank you as always for listening and watching. I can be found on social media at Simon466cards, actually just IG, and I will talk to you all later. Cheers.